Party Secretary General Bo Silai, and old and dear friend, Mayor Huang Kifan, my other dear friends and colleagues, Pascal Lamy and Patricia Francis, many friends from China and abroad, excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is not an exaggeration if I say that when we heard that Patricia was organizing this major important event on world export development in Chongqing, that we need not to be persuaded very long to subscribe to our participation here. For Pascal and I, Patricia and ITC is a brother and a sister. And maybe as a child, because as Nami used to tell me, we are the parents. And we hope that the child has grown up to be like the parents, and more so, to exceed what the parents can do. And so, one of the strongest motivation for, particularly I can say this, I hope for Pascal, for us to be here this afternoon, is to demonstrate our strongest support for what the ITC has been doing, particularly under Patricia Francis. And this is not a small matter, because she came in at a very difficult time for the global economy, and also during the time that ITC has gone through some restructuring. I have to be honest, for all of us, to give Patricia the due credit that you should deserve to take for the efforts in the last few years that we've been working together. When the new mantra for ITC came by way of saying that ITC is working to promote export impact for good. And this is exactly to the point, that while we are seeing that import and export, the trade has been growing around the world, and export trade has been moving forward, particularly for the poor countries, European countries. In the past 10 years, if I'm correct, the share of export to the GDP of emerging countries has increased from close to 30% to more than 40%, roughly in that neighborhood. So if that increase in the share of export in the GDP of the European countries has been established, surely some credits or some main credits must go to organizations like the International Trade Center, which has specialized so well and in creating this leadership, in working with both of us from the WTO and UNCTAD, so that all the rules and regulations on the multilateral trading side, all the policy options that UNCTAD has been producing could be brought to bear on the way that real implementations to produce, to market export, to network export, to create a supply chain, and to help to make export work for development. That is the crux of the matter. It's not purely to drive at more and more export per se, because as you can see, for particularly those of you who've been working in the export areas and trying to link export growth with domestic development, that not in every country that one can be successful in linking export growth to employment, to enhancing the skills of indigenous companies and human resources. Only when you have targeted policies, only when you realize the need for doing the export impact for good, that you can have the kind of discretionary policies to drive forward the kind of, I would say, development-friendly oriented export. In the past couple of years, and here we are going to talk about the changing trading patterns after the recession. In the past few years, it has been quite clearly demonstrated that those countries that have been doing well in taking good care of their own trade positions, and particularly those that have been very competitive in exporting their own products, and mainly some of these are to be found in Asia, that the reserves that have been built up, international reserves have been built up because of the revenue from export, has been the shield, the cushion that has actually helped the Asian economies to be much less affected by international crisis. And the truth is that since the first few quarters of 2009, even before the middle of the year, countries like China, India, Southeast Asian countries have been leading the way in recovering from the crisis earlier than the rest of the world. And it was mainly because they all have been shielded from this impact by their adherence to open trade, to trade that has rendered them competitive, and to have been very prudent in accumulating sufficient reserves for some of the rainy days, like in the past few years. So here again, we do see that this is export for good that has actually produced a kind of realistic results for some parts of the world, and some parts of the world will need to be catching up with this process. I would look forward that the experiences that have been seen to be in a very positive way in Asia, in some parts of Latin America, in some parts of Africa, that all this could be handled by the International Trade Center in a way that the lessons could be learned for the rest of the world. And I'm not saying that everything that Asia does is the right thing, or the BRIC country is doing everything right in that matter, but there are some lessons that some countries have been doing well in terms of export development that is really linked to domestic development strategy that could be replicated elsewhere. And here when we were at the Xiamen meeting, the Second World Investment Forum, we did talk a lot about how we can help to restructure export from certain parts of the world, particularly from the LDCs, from African LDCs in particular. Because as we're seeing the achievement for many countries around the world in expanding their export commitment and their export shares of GDP, and actually the whole group of the developing countries have actually gained in terms of market share, which has risen from 30% of the global export market to 38% in the last 10 years. But how come countries in Africa are not making such a gain? And how come are some of our LDCs, least developed countries, still caught up in the vicious circle of being totally dependent on commodities export? And this is a challenge in which I hope Patricia and her colleagues in ITC could help us in facing down the challenge and help us to devise ways and means through investment strategy that we have tried to come up with during our Xiamen meeting to help countries in Africa to diversify and to try to help countries to be adding value to their commodities. And this is what trade can help to do, to add value. But you can't add value if you just dig up something up from the ground and you just pass it on to some other countries. Apart from all this, what we are seeing post-crisis world trade patterns is that the emergence of the South, what UNCTAD would call emergence of the global South, is really something of real value. It's not something that we are just saying because it's nice thing to say that we should be trading more among the open countries. This is becoming a reality. It's becoming the real flesh of the trade. The World Bank has been saying that in the next decade, half of global demand will come from emerging countries. Half. So you cannot deny them. You cannot ignore them. And at least 40% of the export market will be in the hands of the emerging countries. And so, again, I'm looking at Patricia and her colleagues at the International Trade Center that this will be another challenge to help all of us with the negotiation going on with the WTO, with us trying to encourage from the side of UNCTAD to promote more and more trade among developing countries. And Pascal would know better than I do that it is a sad fact that among developing countries, the protectionist level is among the highest in the world.